So the origin of this video is that it is essentially an add-on to the previous video, the one that I just dropped this week, which was on the toughest reads that I've had to face this year, 2022, and my anticipation that there will be some kind of concern as to the way I approach my reading. I know from that video alone some might be inclined to think that I essentially just punish myself when I pick up these books, and that I am only doing this to make myself uncomfortable or push myself to an unhealthy limit, perhaps. I assure you that I am perfectly fine. I'm doing perfectly well. There's been no lasting damage that any book that I've read has caused. But I understand, the nature of that video. It's very sensitive and hard to deal with language that we have to attach to, books that make us feel that way. And so that video might be a bit of a tougher pill to swallow. But if you're subscribed to Plagued by Visions, you're probably used to swallowing some very, very tough pills. But essentially, in this video, I want to talk about my favorite reads for this year. Reads that have been illuminating. Some are disturbing, some are in that same sort of vein of transgressive fiction, but there are others that were favorites of mine for other, maybe more positive reasons, or lighter reasons, or equally passionate reasons, but away from the darker subject matter and into other areas. It's very varied. There's all kinds of books here on this pile. Essentially what I did was I just went through my Goodreads and I jotted down every single title that I've given 5 stars to since the beginning of this year, excluding rereads. I do reread a lot of books, and I enjoy rereading a lot of books. I have given 5 stars to books multiple times, to the same book, but I'm not counting those because I feel like the nature of this video also calls for sort of like this notion of exploration. What have I discovered this year that has blown me away? Maybe there's some new favorites in this pile instead of the time-honored ones that I reread again and again. So it's going to be the newer books, my favorite books that I've discovered this year. And I'm just going to try to quickly, hopefully, briefly go through each and every one of them. It's not going to be thorough, incisive reviews on each and every one, because that would just take way too much time. There's 14 titles in total here. Like I said, all of them I've given 5 stars to. I should say, there is one reread. So I am a liar. No, but there is one reread that I chose to include in here because my experience rereading it was very different from the initial time that I read it. And my personal reception of it changed dramatically, where I would have initially probably given it like 2 or something stars. This time around I gave it 5. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. So there is one reread, but the rest are all new finds. I'm going to try to go quickly through each and every one of them, and we're going to see what kind of discussion sparks from these. And some of them I will be giving hints to you as to maybe I will be talking about them more thoroughly in a future video or something like that. So there will be little hints like that dropped, and I will go through them in the order in which I read them, and I will tell you which month I read any particular title. So we're going to go by month. And so, yeah, here we go. This will be fun to revisit so many good books. All right, we're starting off with the month of January. And in the month of January, I had 2 5-star reads. The first of which was the Stories of Breece DJ Pancake by Breece DJ Pancake. I did talk about this in the first video that I made this year, which was called perhaps a little too narcissistically The Return of the King, but it was kind of like a tongue-in-cheek title, don't worry. But basically I had taken a hiatus. I took a lot of hiatuses, I'm sure you all noticed, but at the beginning of the year when I first came back, I talked briefly about this. I read this during that initial hiatus for this year, and I was just completely blown away by the quiet but powerful affect that I found in here. These are not stories that I would necessarily call horror at all. I don't think anybody would. They're not in that same vein of the genre at all, but there is something I feel richly and bleakly gothic about them. There's a lot of introspection, a lot of meditation on life and death, especially death. And there's a profuse sense of decay in a lot of these stories. A lot of our narrators are sort of uh, leading themselves slowly into the end of their lives, which sort of very tragically reflects the real life experience of the author Breece DJ Pancake, who did take his own life when he was very, very young, and he left behind only this handful of stories. As you can see, it's not a very thick volume at all. These are the complete stories that he wrote, or at least the ones that were possible to compile in here. And that notion, that there's an entire life's worth of stories sort of cemented in here, feels, like I said, very tragic, very, very wistful, and reading them heightens, exacerbates, you might even want to say, that feeling. And yeah, it was just beautiful, sort of economic prose, nothing too broad or florid, but it is, like I said, very introspective, very meditative. There's a lot of weight to the brief words that are laid out here, and works like this, are so fascinating because you're simultaneously exploring the stories, exploring the work of fiction, and you're also exploring the life of an author, especially a life as tragically brief as this one. You're growing to know, because it's the life's worth of writing, you're growing to know the trajectory of this individual, of this artist, and what they went through it, and his philosophy is fully felt in here. A lot of it is very flawed. This is the perspective of a young white man from the 70s, as you can expect. Takes on race and sex and gender are very lacking, but nonetheless, what I liked about it was the sincerity and punch behind its words, the briefness, the exploration, like I said, of an author's life. I read it at a particular time in my life, aka earlier this year, where I was going through a lot of rough times, a lot of rough experiences, and reading something like this that sort of reflects that bleakness, you might think would worsen your condition, but not to me. To me, it feels therapeutic. It feels like fiction is this space where we can safely deal with our feelings, and safely dealing with your feelings can feel very therapeutic and fulfilling or illuminating in some way. And so yes, beginning the year with this was very intense, very powerful, but also very rewarding. And then following that, also in January, I read and gave 5 stars to Solar Storms by Linda Hogan. This is a novel about a Native American community, sort of exploring a lot of it's a multi-generational novel exploring the lives of various women from a Minnesota native reservation, and it deals, as you can expect, profusely with the subject of tradition and the mutative nature of tradition, but also its resilience. And I think resilience, power, strength are the initial words that spark in my mind when I think of the experience of reading this. Just beautiful, laying the soul bare and naked, and being, yes, exposed in that way, being vulnerable in that way, but also showing strength, stripping back decades and decades of abuse and injury and wounds that remain for centuries, as is the experience of a lot of Native American people, but also in peeling through those wounds, revealing the rigidity of the bones that hold them up, the structure, brutal and unignorable power of tradition. So beautiful, so amazing. And also read around that time where I was not feeling my best, and perhaps in a selfish way, of course, to take something that deals so directly with tradition and a very specific community and a very specific moment in history and geography, but I also took away something of the personal while reading this. It meant something to me, those notions of power and finding resilience in the face of adversity. It's very captivating, wonderfully captivating, and Linda Hogan's prose is quite magnificent. I did buy another novel of hers, Mean Spirit, after I read this one. After I completed my 100 book challenge, because at the time I couldn't buy books. So Mean Spirit will be my next read, and I've heard it. I think it's even more critically lauded than this one, so I'm sure I'll end up loving it. So that was it for January and February. I did not have any 5-star reads. But then in the month of March, I had 4 of them. But there's a little bit of context that I feel like I have to give for the month of March. In the month of March, although I didn't make any content about it, I didn't make a video wrapping it up or anything like that, but I did participate in middle grade March. But my participation only went as far as I read books that fulfilled the prompt of reading middle grade literature for the month of March. And so I read a lot of books. I think that's the month that I read the most books, but they were mostly children's books. So, very short, or you read them in like an hour, sometimes even less than that. So yeah, amongst those middle grade children's books that I read, 3 of them I gave 5 stars to, and then the 4th book that I read also in March, which was not middle grade, but also gave 5 stars to. So the first one that I have here, that I have a physical copy of, is One Day at HorrorLand by R.L. Stine, which is part of the Goosebumps series, the original Goosebumps series. This was given to me as a gift by the wonderful, amazing, kind friend of mine and fellow booktuber, Monster Blood, whose channel is dedicated largely to Goosebumps and R.L. Stine and YA and middle grade horror like that. So thank you, Austin, for gifting me this book. And of course, now, as you can see, I loved it. I have read since last year. Last year, 2021, was the first time that I ever read a Goosebumps book. I missed out on them throughout my childhood, and reading my first Goosebumps book back in July of last year and loving it, I sort of deeply regretted that I didn't pick any of these up when I was a kid, because I feel like I would have really liked them. But this one was gifted to me because Austin said this is one of the best out of the original series. And I've only read a couple of the original series now, but I'll agree. It really was. This is about, of course, a family that's going on vacation, and they chance upon this theme park called HorrorLand, where the rides, it's run by these like goblin-like creatures, and the rides are fatal. They're to die for. There's a lot of peril, but the kind of like kid-like fun kind of peril. Lots of false cliffhangers, as is the style of R.L. Stine, but it does pick up a really fun pace. When they actually get to the theme park, you see all the different rides, all the different humorous interactions that go on around the park. And then the twist, or like the final zinger, is sort of like a knee-slapping fun time, and it was just a delight, and just the thing that I wanted to read for middle grade March. Something fun, something light, something to break the monotony of really horrid and putrid literature. I had a lot of fun with this, and I think it's the most fun that I've had with a Goosebumps book so far, and so that is why I gave it 5 stars. And then after that, the next 2 I don't have physical copies of, but the next middle grade book that I gave 5 stars to was The Bridge to Terabithia. I had actually never read this before. I remember fellow students talking about it back when I was in elementary, and they would talk about it with this very sort of jaded and concerned tone. So I was always curious, but it wasn't until now that I picked it up. And I picked it up on the promise, I guess, essentially, that it would be a sort of disturbing, or at least off-putting children's book. And it wasn't really. It's not really disturbing. It's not really off-putting in any way. In fact, another middle grade book that I read for the month of March, How to Eat Fried Worms, was more transgressive and disgusting than this was. But Bridge to Terabithia I gave 5 stars to, because I feel like it's one of the most honest explorations of childhood that I've ever read, and it's not necessarily throughout the whole book that I felt that, but there was a particular moment in there, and I guess I will give spoilers. The latter half of this book is pretty well known, so spoiler tag is probably not that necessary, but still, I'll give it to you. Skip to when you don't see the book on the screen anymore if you want to avoid that. But yeah, I had wanted to read this because there is that moment in which a child dies in this book, and it's this very impactful, emotional moment because she's one of the 2 main characters. So it's essentially, it's a novel about the forged friendship between a boy and a girl who are in that awkward preteen age, and how they meet and how they get to know each other and play with each other, and the games that they play involve their making of this fantasy land called Terabithia, and in engaging in their games it sort of reflects their real life struggles and concerns and worries and anxieties as the preteens that they are, and the tragedy that befalls the narrative once the female friend dies and the male friends sort of dealing with this loss. And the particular moment that I'm talking about that led me to give this book 5 stars was the moment in which this boy is attending his friend's funeral. And when he's there and he sees people crying and he sees sort of like the more typical adult reactions to death, he finds himself not crying. He finds himself really frustrated at the people that are feeling pity for him or feeling bad for him. He feels annoyed at his friend. He feels some kind of resentment at her for dying. And there's all these awkward, hard to deal with emotions that are so infused in the experience of childhood, but that I seldom ever see explored as honestly and clearly as they were here. So it was just beautiful. One of the most definitely bone-chilling but also weirdly, I don't know, was spiritually fulfilling depictions of death and grief that I have seen. And yes, I do think that it deserves its status as a classic in middle grade literature. And then the third middle grade book that I read this year and gave 5 stars to was Charlotte's Web, which, believe it or not, I had also never read. And I should also throw another spoiler tag too. So if you just skipped the Bridge to Terabithia one and you landed here, and you also haven't read Charlotte's Web, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to skip again because we're also gonna get into spoilers. So yeah, skip ahead until you don't see Charlotte's Web anymore. So yes, Charlotte's Web, this brutal novel. I did not know what the story consisted of. I only knew there were talking animals in it because I'd seen like this weird CGI pig talking in a trailer I saw when I was a kid, I want to say. Or that might be a false memory. But yeah, it's essentially about this girl and her life at the farm with these animals, starting with a moment in which she saves this baby pig that is about to be cold-bloodedly murdered for being a runt, and then leading into the pig's friendship with this spider named Charlotte, and sort of paralleling, you know, this fable-like story of animals paralleling the story of the human characters, or not paralleling, but going with the flow of and how they interact, but how they also differ, but the real human life lessons that we can glean from struggles that we as humans impose on animals. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on there. But then what happens? Charlotte, the spider that we grow to love and care for through the book, just fucking dies at the end. At the end of this beautiful story involving cute fucking animals with cute illustrations, or at least the one that I read had cute illustrations and all this childlike beauty and wonder at the world and the struggles that it promises, but also their rewards, and then death, cold-blooded, fucking fetid death in your face. So I was like, fuck, 5 stars, holy shit. So yeah, Charlotte's Web, most disturbing children's book that I've ever read. And then the fourth non-middle grade book that I read for March, but that I also gave 5 stars to, was The Theater and Its Double, which is nonfiction by Antonin Artaud, in which I read, I don't know why I read this back then. I guess, you know, this was late into my 100 book challenge, in which I was reading 100 books of the ones I already owned before I could buy new ones. And reading this one during that time, during the late portion of that time, I think I was just kind of deliriously picking out random books from my shelf that looked kind of slender and quick to get through, and this was sort of relatively quick to get through as far as nonfiction goes. You know, nonfiction tends to be a little dense, and you have to take it 5 or so pages at a time, but the case for this was that it was just a little bit more feverish, a little bit more unabashedly enthusiastic about the powers of art than most nonfiction that I'm used to reading. And so the enthusiasm and the power, and of course the figurations of something like transgression that are laid out throughout here by Artaud, who was this really eccentric, hungry artist who sought to push the limits of artistic expression in the form of theater. This was pretty amazing and captivating, and the conviction that he has to the limitless potential of theater and its ability to tell a story, I think that's what drew me in the most. So for those reasons, I gave this 5 stars. And then we moved into the month of April, where I read 2 books that I gave 5 stars to, and both of these were really, really bleak, brutal, transgressive, disturbing, monstrous books. So it was another nice, I guess, change of pace from middle grade March. But the first of the 2 that I gave 5 stars to in this month was Tomb for 500,000 Soldiers by Pierre Guyotat, which I am going to talk about in a future video in a bit more detail. This is one of those hints that I promised at the beginning. So yes, Tomb for 500,000 Soldiers. There will be more words on it on this channel, but for now what I want to say is I don't think I had ever read a book that had so much conviction towards throwing away the humanity in its voice. There is a lot of brutalizing and torturing and murdering of people in this book. It takes place within ill-defined contours of a nation, within ill-defined contours of a time in history, but it is a kind of imagery and feverish rot of death that we can easily recognize as something that permeates any war in any place. And the way in which Guyotat is so dedicated to exploring the artistic promises behind getting so close to capturing a sense of death in here, in letting wounds and in letting brutal violence against human bodies, wordless violence at that, in letting all of that sort of fester as the basis of his novel. It hopes to grasp at something, I guess, sort of spiritual, you know, and if to see if there's any kind of spiritual meaning or fulfillment behind all the brutal death that permeates war, and exploring that kind of limit, that non-human limit, that non-living limit. It leads to some really, really trippy places. And like I said, I will talk more about this one, but it was so mind-blowingly bleak and tough to grasp and really tough to swallow. And you all know I love books like that. And then the next book is one that I already talked about in this channel, but I'll go over it briefly. This was an entry that I proposed into my most disturbing book series, The Maimed by Herman, Ungar, which I said is one of the bleakest books that I've read. So reading this in the same month as the Guyotat one was quite an experience. This one is about the day-to-day life of a man who sees himself constantly humiliated, made to feel less of, sort of dehumanized in a sense, in the day-to-day interactions that he has with multiple people, and the sort of brutal hunger for destruction that the people around him feel, and how that sort of starts to warp his perception of himself, his perception of his life, of the worth of his life, his perception of humanity, of women, of the way that women treat him, of the way that he feels sexual urges, but also urges to damage, urges to be disgusted by, all manner of really, really disconcerting and ugly questions and notions proposed in here. And Herman, Ungar, I mean, it's a translation, this is a European novel, but even in that translation you can still glean that language of really, really toughened, hardened, 1,000-yard stare conviction of there's just nothing that's any good or worth doing here on this earth. And the lingering breath of those words, you know, it's a printed book that is largely detached from the context or the individual that composed it, but still feeling, you know, the lingering stench of the breath that conceived of these words. It's something that when it's done really well, I can really feel it in some way. It's amazing. It's quite outstanding. It's a classic of transgressive fiction that I don't hear talked about a lot, and I feel like it should be talked about more than it is. All right, and now we're moving into the month of May, in which I participated. I was a co-host in the event titled Horror Mayhem, which was dedicated to reading horror titles, which I already do it a lot anyway, but there were prompts for each week on what kind of horror to read. One of those prompts, which I believe was in week 3 of the month of May, was cosmic horror. So read any kind of work of cosmic horror. And the one that I chose to read was not necessarily a work that was written as cosmic horror once the tradition was already set and defined and identified. During the time of Lovecraft is when that happened. But, I have to insist that Lovecraft did not invent cosmic horror, but I guess he was the first one to define it or identify it. But I would say one of the works that, if not invented cosmic horror, at least really forged its shape into what it became at the time of Lovecraft, was The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen, which is the one reread that I said I was going to include in here. But I can hardly bring myself to consider it a reread because, like I said, my experience rereading this was very different from the initial time that I read it, because back then I was a teenager and my soft underdeveloped teenager brain read this and was like, it's kind of boring, it's kind of weird, but where's the blood, man? Where I want to see the guts and the gore, like I'm fucked up like that. That's how I talked when I was 18. But now having reread it, now being a more refined gentleman of 29, now that I read it at this age and with this sort of added knowledge and understanding and appreciation for the genre, I can totally see why this has been cemented as a classic. I mean, the flirtations with transgressive subject matter that are included in here, the way that it unabashedly insists on being weird and undefined and unexplainable, and the way that it sets out to really ruffle your feathers, but make you tense, but adding tension to certain parts of the human imagination that we never really feel comfortable exploring, and leaving open-ended questions and introducing characters that have ill-defined origins and really fearful unknown motivations. All of that weirdness, all of that unanswered gloom and doom, and sort of a semi-nihilistic view of the world is coming undone as knowledge being revealed, and of course cosmic horror thriving in that moment of revelation, in that moment of destabilization, where the curtain is pulled and you see what the real machinations are behind existence, and then you're like, ugh, existence is so ugly and gross. And it's thanks to works like The Great God Pan that we can be constantly reminded of that, and that is wonderful, I guess. All right, now for the month of June, I also only had one 5-star read, and that was The Cormorant by Gregory. This came to my attention as a recommendation in the collab video that I did here on this channel for my Disturbing Book series. Part 7 included recommendations from a large pool of booktubers, one of whom was Alex the Bookcubus, who has a fantastic channel dedicated to all things spooky and macabre, and this was one of her picks for the most disturbing book that she was recommending. The other one was The Wood Witch, also by Gregory, which I also have a copy of, so since I gave this 5 stars and I loved it and it's one of my favorite reads from this year, you can imagine I'm probably going to pick that other one up very soon. But yes, The Cormorant, a very, very lean novel about something strange, bizarre, kind of absurd, kind of verging a little bit into humor, but not fully, not at all. Actually, just little hints of it. But man, the nightmarish nature of this little novel, you could almost even say novella, was disconcertingly sublime as an experience. You know, that experience that Edmund Burke defined as sublime, as coming face to face with something that's both beautiful and brutal. You know, that terrible beauty that Yeats wrote about. That's what I found here. This is absolutely a quiet little nightmare about terrible, terrible beauty in a way. And it doesn't really set out to be beautiful. There's nothing here that's sort of aesthetically grandiose, like you would expect something, you know, out of the word beautiful. But no, it's more pulled back. Like you can say, it's very economic writing. It's not feeding into this sort of florid writing of the pen. No, it's a story about a man a married man who takes his wife and their toddler son to live in a cabin that they have inherited from one of the man's distant uncles. They didn't really know him, but they knew him to be a little bit eccentric towards the end of his life, particularly because he took on a cormorant, which is this large bird that lives in ponds and stuff like that. This really large, mean-looking bird. Oh, there's one right there. And took one as a pet. You know, a cormorant is a wild bird. It's not really domesticated. It's not a bird that you keep as a pet. But having passed and having left his cabin to these people in his will, he has also left them his pet cormorant and has said that they can only keep the property so long as they take care of this cormorant. And the man sets to the task because he really wants to keep this beautiful vacation cabin. But eventually his dedication to taking care of the cormorant turns into obsession, and that obsession turns into really surreal, feverish horror. And then that culminates into a moment so beautiful, I don't even want to hint anything at it, because you have to experience it in the context of the way the story unfolds. This was absolutely breathtakingly a testament to the beauty and the disconcerting, disquieting nature behind horror and behind stories that, you know, they pack that punch right to the gut, right at the very end. My God, this was incredible. So yeah, if you like horror, if you like a quiet, more subdued kind of horror, this is the one for you. All right, and then July had no 5-star reads, but then August had 2 of them, one of which I already talked about before in the video that I did when I came back after almost fucking dying. But this is a book that I gave 5 stars to, and I said I was very moved by it, and I read this during my emergency hospitalization, and this does deal with hospitalizations briefly now and then. It does certainly deal with injury and being damaged and broken and dealing with a lot of recuperation and weakness. But anyway, The Magician by Christopher Zeischegg was, I think, cemented itself as a moment in my life as a reader that I will never forget. This was very kindly sent to me by the author, who is a really amazing person himself, but speaking only of his work, I found myself truly drawn into this story, the kind of which I can honestly say I had never really read anything like it before. It's just it's a story about a kind of auto-fictional version of the author, a main character named Chris, who is going through the pains of just drifting through life, not knowing what to dedicate himself to, not knowing what to commit himself to, whether it be a relationship, a career, etc. But then things turn witchy. Things turn a little wicked and supernatural, and then when they turn wicked and supernatural, the narrative shifts to being this really melancholy, heartfelt, wistful tale of familial bonds, of finding inner strength versus being overcome by your outer weaknesses, and a lot of supernatural tension that does fold into the narratives of familial tension and familial sort of struggles and alienation. There's a lot of explorations about, you know, the relationships, particularly between mother and son, which I found to be really, really beautiful, sort of meditative, almost too painful kinds of moments where you look into a really bright light and it's overwhelming and you have to turn away. I kind of felt like that at times. So yeah, this was a magnificent, raw, honest narrative from an author that I really want to read more works by. So amazing, such a unique book. I really feel like I've never really read something like it, and I hope it stays that way. I hope this is sort of like this unique experience that has marked me as a reader. And then speaking of unique experiences that have marked me as a reader, my God, we have Vitiators by Elytron Frass and then illustrated by Charles N. This is from Expat Press, which is an indie press. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to link this. I'm going to leave a link that you can follow directly to purchase this, because they don't sell through Amazon or anything like that. It can only be bought through their website. So remember to do that. But yes, this is actually a graphic novel. And this is another one of those that I'm going to be giving a more thorough review to in the future, because there's just so much to say, and it opens up discussions about other works that preceded that I found sort of their lasting mark, or you might even say stain on the world of literature, sort of lead into some of the illusions that we find here, or at least visual cues or artistic philosophies, you could say. But yes, this is a work of transgressive iconography, sort of manga graphic novel, meta self-commentary on the form and on the styles of narrative and on audience expectations. And it does all of this very intelligent and might I say very eloquent commentary on these forms of narrative and their reception and their development, and their sort of importation from other areas, which have developed their own visual and artistic traditions. But not only does it do all of that, but it's also a super trippy fucking graphic novel with lots of death and assault and abuse and torture and decay and debauchery. And it's just like Hieronymus Bosch if he fucking read Akira and took a hit of acid and said, fuck it, let's roll. Really wonderful. I'm going to be talking about this one more thoroughly, like I said. But yes, this is quite amazing. I'm just letting you know, if you like disturbing works and if you like graphic novels, just expand that description box right now, click that link and go buy it. Do yourself a favor. All right, and then on to the last month that I'm going to be talking about, the month of September. In October, I only read like 2 books because I was really stressed and taking a break from a lot of things, taking a break from life, taking a break from being a sentient being. And then November, we're still here. I'm not saying there's no possibility that November or December will yield other favorite works, other 5-star works, but I will wrap those up in due time. I'm just feeling like I need to get these out of the way. And so September with 2 5-star reads. The first one is a little book, a little indie affair not many people have heard of. It's Moby-Dick by Herman Melville, who is about to blow up now that I'm giving him a shout out here on Plagued by Visions. So I buddy read this classic gargantuan beast with Ollie from the channel Criminally, and we both really liked it. And we're both readers who are not used to, or who don't particularly seek out classics. I don't have a problem with classics. Ollie doesn't have a problem with classics either, but it's just that, like I've said, the discussions around classics are just so extensive, have centuries worth of back and forths and examinations, and it's like, well, what can I say about it? You know, what can I add to the discussion of Moby-Dick? You know, what can Juan from Plagued by Visions even remotely grasp at some original take on it? And but I figured, you know, I'm not going to worry myself or stress myself trying to do that, and instead I'm going to enjoy my time reading this cemented classic for the first time, this American classic, which I really did like. I mean, give it 5 stars. But I found the technique that I started employing while reading it was that I wasn't going to be taken by questions of what the book means, right? What's the metaphor behind it? What does the whale represent? Or what is all this, symbolism really leading at? Because there's a lot of metaphors that feed into this figuration of the world, as all of it being reflected through separate elements of whaling, uncovering all of this constant exegesis found through the book that demands analysis of itself, putting the whale parallel to the birth of all the horrors and monstrosity of the world, and sort of there's a chapter in here particularly that's dedicated to the color white, the whiteness of the whale. That is one of the actually most effectively horrific sort of vignettes or little segments that I've ever read. I mean, truly, it feels cosmically horrific in its execution. So it grasps at delirious heights like that with its examinations of whaling. It grasps at depth, really true depth into history, by making metaphors with what it's like to mop the floors or set an anchor or clean the deck, things like that. So it's really fascinating and sort of like interpretatively rich in that sense. But I tell myself I'm not gonna get taken by questions of what it means, but I just enjoyed it for what it was. I sort of try to really anchor myself, no pun intended, into the richness of his language. What is this weird sense of homoeroticism that I get the feeling of towards the beginning when Ishmael is sharing a bed with Queequeg, things like that. It's just weird, but really beautiful and breathtakingly sublime moments and descriptions and notions and figurations of an entire world in and of itself, ingrained into this microcosm of whaling that Melville explores within an inch of its life. It's just so incredible to see dedication to language and dedication to writing, and dedication to sort of like self-commentary on symbolism and things like that. It's just so wonderful to experience those for the first time, especially with something like Moby-Dick, which is like a book that everybody talks about. So yeah, this was quite amazing, quite another experience as a reader that will forever mark me. And might even be a book that I'll reread in the future, even though I never thought I would find myself saying that. But yes, Moby-Dick is amazing. Check it out. Give it a review on Amazon so more people can hear about it. We need to get the word out. And then the last 5-star book that I have read for this year is Thirst for Love by Yukio Mishima. Oh, the deliciousness of this. And I have to start off by giving a shout out to and thanking my, I would now say, good friend Joseph, who I met through doing this channel and talking to him on Instagram. Joseph, who's watching all the way from the UK. This was a buddy read that I did with him. Thankfully, we both loved it. And I say thankfully because I fucking love this book. And if he hadn't liked it, there would have been tension. Yukio Mishima, I hadn't read Mishima in a couple of months, and not reading Mishima for a couple of months feels like an eternity once you actually sit down and remember, oh yeah, this guy is really fucking good at writing. And this is a sort of departure from certainly my favorite book by him, which was The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. And I'm thinking, should I really say was? Is this my new favorite by Mishima? Time and a little more meditation will tell, but whereas The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea was very centered on exploring tensions with intergenerational differences ingrained in the subject of gender, of masculinity, of the male role in society, or the male expectation, the male cultural expectations, and their growing sort of demand and toll on the human soul. But here we see a very similar mechanic, a really similar exploration, but our main character in this case is female. So this is a story about Etsuko, a widow who lives in the house of her father-in-law, the father of her now deceased husband, who she is now having an affair with. And it is an affair that is never explicitly described, except for some caresses or exchanges of words, but which you fully feel the brutal and ravaging destruction that it is enacting upon Etsuko's life. And beyond that, the story also becomes a story about an affair that Etsuko is attempting to have with one of the young boys who works within the father-in-law's premises, Saburo. So it really becomes a story about the affair that she is having with her father-in-law versus the affair that she wants to have. The correspondence between all of the members of this family, this really weird, eccentric family, and also all of the tensions between, and this is something that Mishima explores so expertly, the tensions between outer appearances and inner struggles, turmoils, and desires, especially vicious carnal desires. So yeah, Mishima, I think, right, it's just someone who I just can't help but say he writes like he's painting. He sees words and he doesn't see these letters. He doesn't see these symbols. He sees colors that he's going to pick up, blend, lay out, give broad strokes with carefully work into the details of, and he paints these pictures. And it's not so much wondering at the final product all of the time. I mean, there's some really rich, powerful, hard-hitting metaphors in here. Some I can even remember off the top of my head. Swallowing the grief of having to live this secret affair, Etsuko describes as swallowing, or she describes it as thorns of roses sort of falling at her mouth, or prickling at her mouth. There's other she describes herself as being really hot and empty inside, or feeling really sort of festering herself with a kind of spiritual death at the time that she is taking care of her terminally ill husband. Things like that are just so like, wow, like, how does he do that with words? And I gotta tell you, reading this while I was editing my own book was very demoralizing because I was like, just stop it right there. You're not gonna be this good ever. But that's fine. But yeah, Mishima writes with such a captivating technique. I find myself wondering more at the technique sometimes than the actual thing that's being conveyed in here. It's just like, how does he work details like that? It's amazing. Beyond that, the story also takes some really disconcerting turns, especially towards the end. This is a work of disturbing fiction, I would call it. A very disturbing ending to this that I'm not going to spoil, of course, but yeah, it's just such a beautiful display of an understanding between the relationship between words and affect, and how a flush of emotion can be laid on a page with the use of words, and also exploring these really tragic, confined existences that I'm sure Mishima fully felt at the time that he was writing. The tension between what is true about yourself versus what cannot be. So tragic, so beautiful, so expertly and unflinchingly explored. This was really quite momentous as a reading experience for me as well. And like I said, the ending is a fucked up ending that leaves a really, really bad taste in your mouth, and just kind of leaves you wondering, why is life gotta be like that? Just dumbfounded, at a loss. Yeah, those are my 14 books that I've given 5 stars to, that I've read for the first time, with the exception of one. Should I just title the video all of that? I hope you enjoyed watching this. Let me know what your favorite reads or read has been or have been for the year of 2022. I look forward to reading about all of that. Let me know if you've read any of the ones that I just talked about. Which ones did you like? Are you surprised that I gave some of these 5 stars? Would you give some of them less? Or do you agree with my rating? All of that. Let's get to talking about it. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all well. Continue to stay safe. And I will see you on the next one.